One rainy afternoon in a small suburban town, Officer Davis was driving through the streets on his usual patrol when he received a call that would change the course of his day. A young child had been spotted walking through the rain, carrying two babies in his arms. The dispatcher informed him that the child appeared to be lost and had been seen near a local park. Officer Davis had seen his fair share of strange situations, but this one caught his attention immediately. When he arrived at the park, Officer Davis saw a little boy, no older than 10, standing by a park bench. The boy was drenched, his clothes clinging to his small frame. He held two babies tightly in his arms, both of them crying softly. The boy looked scared, his wide eyes darting around, as if he didn't know what to do next. The babies were dressed in oversized jackets, and Officer Davis could tell they had been out in the rain for quite some time. Approaching the boy gently, Officer Davis spoke in a calm, soothing voice. "Hey there, buddy. What's your name? Are you okay?" The boy didn't respond at first, but his eyes started to fill with tears as he looked up at the officer. I found them," the boy stammered, his voice shaky. "They were alone. I didn't know what to do. I had to help them." Officer Davis crouched down to the boy's level, carefully taking one of the babies from his arms. The baby, a little girl with dark eyes, was wet and shivering. The other baby, a boy, looked equally as cold and frightened. The officer could see the concern in the boy's eyes as he held onto the babies, clearly protective of them. "Where did you find them, son?" Officer Davis asked, trying to get more information. "Over by the swings. They were all alone," the boy explained. "I didn't want to leave them there. They were crying, and no one was around." The officer's heart ached for the boy and the babies. It was clear that something was wrong. He knew he had to get them to safety, but he also needed to figure out what had happened. "What's your name, kid?" he asked again, wanting to make sure the boy felt safe. "My name is Timmy," the boy said, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "I didn't know what to do. I thought I should call for help, but I didn't have a phone." Officer Davis smiled reassuringly at Timmy. "You did the right thing by bringing them here. We're going to make sure everything is okay." He quickly radioed for backup, instructing them to send an ambulance to the scene. The babies needed medical attention, and Timmy would need to be looked after as well. As the officer waited for help to arrive, he tried to comfort Timmy and the babies as best as he could. Timmy seemed to relax a little, but there was still a sense of fear in his eyes. He was just a child himself, yet he had taken it upon himself to care for two helpless babies. Officer Davis couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for the boy. Despite his young age, Timmy had shown more compassion and responsibility than many adults would in such a situation. The sound of sirens grew louder as the ambulance arrived, and Officer Davis helped to get the babies safely into the vehicle. Timmy was placed in the back of the police car, where he was given a blanket to keep warm. Officer Davis sat beside him, trying to get him to open up more about what had happened. "Do you know who those babies are?" Officer Davis asked gently. Timmy shook his head. "No, I don't. But I didn't want them to be alone. I knew I had to help them." Officer Davis nodded, impressed by Timmy's maturity. The officer made a promise to Timmy that they would find out what had happened and make sure the babies were safe. But little did Timmy know, his actions would lead to uncovering a much larger story than he could have imagined. As the police car drove toward the station, Officer Davis reflected on what he had just witnessed. Timmy's bravery was undeniable, but there was something more at play here, something he had yet to understand. The next steps in the investigation would be crucial, but for now, Officer Davis was simply grateful that the children were safe. As Officer Davis drove Timmy to the police station, the sound of rain pattering against the police car's windows filled the silence. Timmy, though still a little shaken, seemed to relax as they made their way through the quiet streets. Officer Davis tried to engage the boy in conversation, but Timmy's eyes were fixed on the window, lost in his thoughts. "So, Timmy," Officer Davis started, trying to break the silence. "Where do you live?" Timmy glanced over at him, his blue eyes wide. "I live with my mom, but it's just the two of us," he said quietly. There was a hint of sadness in his voice, but he quickly turned his attention back to the rain outside, his fingers fiddling with the edge of the blanket the officer had given him. "Do you know those babies?" Officer Davis asked gently. "Do you know who their parents are?" Timmy shook his head. "No, sir. I don't know them. I found them alone, just crying by the swings." He paused for a moment before adding, "I couldn't just leave them there. I had to help." Officer Davis nodded, feeling a mix of admiration and concern for the young boy. Timmy's actions were extraordinary for someone his age. Not many children would have the courage or responsibility to take care of two babies in such a dangerous situation. When they arrived at the station, Timmy was immediately taken to a safe room where social workers were waiting to help. The twins, still crying, were taken to the hospital for medical evaluation. Officer Davis knew it was important to gather as much information as possible. His next step was to start the investigation. Timmy's mother, Karen, was contacted, and she arrived at the station soon after. Officer Davis explained the situation to her, and her face filled with concern when she heard about what had happened. Timmy's mother was a kind woman who had struggled with raising her son alone, but she was fiercely protective of him. Karen expressed gratitude that Timmy had brought the babies to safety, but there was confusion in her eyes when she asked, "How could anyone leave babies out there like that? Why would they be alone?" "I don't know yet," Officer Davis replied. "We're still trying to find out what happened, but rest assured, we'll do everything we can to find the twins' family and make sure they're okay." As the investigation began, Officer Davis reached out to local hospitals and orphanages to see if anyone had reported missing babies. However, nothing came up. The babies weren't listed as missing, and no one had contacted the authorities about them. The case was growing more mysterious by the hour. That night, Officer Davis stayed late at the station, reviewing all the information they had gathered. The twins had no identification, no medical records, and no clear history. Timmy had been unable to provide much more detail about where the babies had come from, but he did recall one detail that stuck in Officer Davis's mind. Timmy mentioned that the babies had been dressed in new clothes, which made it clear someone had been taking care of them recently. A pattern began to form in Officer Davis's mind. The twins were likely abandoned, but they had not been out in the cold long. Someone had cared for them at some point, even if just hours before they were left at the park. It wasn't a random act. There had to be a reason for it. The following day, after much searching, Officer Davis received an unexpected phone call. It was a woman from a nearby neighborhood who had seen the twins earlier that day. She recognized the twins from a picture posted on social media by a local charity, which had been raising money for their medical needs. The twins had been living with their grandmother, who had recently fallen ill, and their mother had been struggling to provide care for them. The mystery was beginning to clear, but the investigation was far from over. The twins' mother had left them in the park, possibly because she was desperate and felt she couldn't provide for them anymore. Officer Davis knew that finding the truth behind the abandonment would take time, but he felt more confident that the answers were just within reach. In the meantime, Timmy's story of caring for the twins was making waves in the community. News spread about the young boy who had saved two babies from the cold, and many were impressed by his bravery. As the investigation continued, Officer Davis and the community began to realize just how much a young boy could accomplish when given the chance to act out of kindness and courage. The days following the discovery of the twins were filled with tension and uncertainty. Officer Davis worked tirelessly, piecing together clues and following leads, but the mystery of the babies' origins remained unsolved. Despite the social workers' efforts and the local authorities' investigation, there were still more questions than answers. The only thing they knew for sure was that the twins had been abandoned in the park and that Timmy had been their unlikely savior. Meanwhile, Timmy's mother, Karen, did her best to reassure her son. She knew how deeply this experience had affected him. Timmy had been a hero in a way no child should have to be. As they sat in their modest apartment, Karen talked to Timmy, gently asking him what he remembered about the night he found the babies. "Timmy," Karen began, her voice soft but concerned, "I know you're scared, but I need to understand. How did you know what to do? You're just a little boy, and you found those babies all alone in the park." Timmy looked at his mother, his small hands clasped tightly together. "I didn't want them to be alone, Mom. They were so small, and I didn't want them to get hurt. I knew I had to do something," Timmy explained. His words made Karen proud, but also sad. Her son had faced something no child should ever have to. She kissed the top of his head, comforting him the best she could. "You did the right thing, Timmy. You're a brave boy, and I'm so proud of you." Despite her efforts to ease his mind, Karen couldn't shake the worry she felt for the twins. The fact that they had been abandoned still haunted her. How could anyone leave such young children alone like that? She knew there had to be a reason, and that reason was something she desperately wanted to understand. Back at the station, Officer Davis was beginning to piece together more information. The call from the woman who had seen the twins earlier that day had been a breakthrough. She had recognized the twins from a post on a local charity's social media. The charity, which focused on helping vulnerable children, had shared photos of the twins in the past, seeking donations for their medical needs. According to the charity's records, the twins had been in the care of their grandmother, who had passed away recently. The twins' mother, it seemed, had been struggling to cope with her responsibilities. After her mother's death, she found herself unable to care for the babies, and the pressure had become too much. It seemed that in a moment of desperation, she had left the twins at the park, hoping someone would find them and take care of them. But the reason behind the abandonment was still unclear. Was it due to mental illness, financial struggles, or was there something deeper at play? In an effort to track down the twins' mother, Officer Davis reached out to the local hospital, where he was informed that the woman had been seen a few days earlier, seeking treatment for a minor injury. The hospital records showed that she had been in a vulnerable state when she visited, which made Officer Davis even more concerned. Was this a case of a mother who had fallen into despair, or was there something more troubling behind her decision to leave the twins? After several more days of searching, Officer Davis was finally able to locate the twins' mother, Sarah, who had been staying with a distant relative in a small town about an hour away. She had been living in a precarious situation, and when the officer visited her, she was initially reluctant to speak. But after a long conversation, Sarah broke down, explaining how difficult life had become after her mother's death. With no support system and facing the overwhelming responsibility of caring for two young children on her own, she had made a desperate decision. "I didn't know what else to do," Sarah admitted, her voice trembling. "I thought someone else would be able to help them. I just couldn't handle it anymore. I thought I was doing the right thing, but now I regret it every day." Officer Davis listened carefully, taking in her words. It was clear that Sarah was struggling with guilt and shame. Her decision to abandon the twins was not one made out of cruelty, but out of fear and desperation. She had believed that by leaving them at the park, she would be giving them a better chance at survival. In the meantime, the twins were placed in foster care, where they received the medical attention they needed. They were healthy, though still traumatized by the experience of being abandoned. Timmy's bravery and quick thinking had saved them, but it was clear that their journey toward healing would be a long one. As Officer Davis continued his investigation, he couldn't help but think about the strange and unexpected way everything had unfolded. Timmy had done something many adults wouldn't have been able to do. He had saved two babies, taking them under his care when no one else was there. Timmy was only a child, but he showed a strength that even many adults lacked. While Timmy was adjusting to life after the incident, with his mother Karen offering him as much comfort as she could, the investigation into the twins' situation was still moving forward. Officer Davis had spoken to the mother, Sarah, but the truth wasn't as clear-cut as he had hoped. She wasn't a criminal, but she had made a desperate decision. In her vulnerable state, She thought she was giving the twins a better chance at life by leaving them somewhere where someone could find them. "Why didn't you just call for help?" Officer Davis had asked her during their conversation. "You could have gone to a shelter or even called a family member for assistance." Sarah had sighed deeply, her eyes filled with sadness and regret. "I didn't know what to do. After Mom died, I couldn't handle the responsibility. It felt like everything was falling apart. I thought maybe leaving them there would give them a better life. But now I see how wrong I was." Her voice shook as she spoke, but Officer Davis could sense that she was truly remorseful. She wasn't a bad person. She was simply overwhelmed by the pressures of life. But even so, what she had done to her children was something that couldn't be ignored. While Sarah continued to live in isolation, trying to piece together the fragments of her life, Officer Davis turned his focus back to the twins. The babies were in good health now, but the trauma of being abandoned was not something that would go away overnight. The social workers who were helping the twins had begun the long process of comforting them, ensuring that they would receive the emotional care they needed. Timmy was also coping with his own feelings. He had always been a kind boy, but this experience had changed him in ways his mother could see. Timmy was more mature now, more thoughtful, but he was also quieter. He had never faced anything like this before, and though he knew he did the right thing by saving the twins, he couldn't help but feel confused and a little scared. Karen, his mother, had been trying her best to offer him comfort and reassurance. She knew Timmy was processing everything, but it hurt her to see how this experience had taken a toll on him. She wanted to take his pain away, but she also knew that Timmy had to come to terms with what had happened in his own way. She spoke to him one evening after dinner, hoping to ease his thoughts. "Timmy," Karen began softly, "I know this has been really tough on you, but what you did was incredible. You saved those babies. You're a hero." Timmy looked up at her, his eyes tired but filled with a quiet strength. "I just didn't want them to be alone, Mom. They were so small. I didn't want them to get hurt." Karen smiled gently, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "And you made sure they weren't. You did the right thing, sweetheart. And I'm so proud of you." Despite her words, Karen couldn't shake the worry she felt for the twins. What had led their mother to such a decision? And what would happen to the twins now that they were in foster care? The thought of them not being with their biological family was painful, but she understood that the most important thing was their safety and well-being. Meanwhile, Officer Davis was pushing forward with his investigation. He had reached out to Sarah's family, hoping to find more information. It wasn't long before he learned that Sarah's situation was far more complicated than it seemed. She had been estranged from her relatives for years, making it even harder for her to reach out for help when she needed it most. Her pride and sense of isolation had pushed her to make a decision that she would regret for the rest of her life. As Officer Davis gathered all the details, he began to see that this was more than just a case of neglect. It was a case of a woman who had been broken by life's hardships and had made a desperate choice. His heart went out to Sarah, but he knew he had a responsibility to protect the twins and ensure they would grow up in a safe, stable environment. The case was far from over, but Officer Davis was determined to find the answers. He would make sure the twins were cared for, while also helping Sarah get the support she needed to turn her life around. It was a long road ahead, but Officer Davis was confident that the community, Timmy, and Sarah could find a way to heal and move forward. The days after Officer Davis's investigation were tense for everyone involved. While Sarah's past weighed heavily on her mind, she was also starting to see a way forward. She wasn't the same woman who had abandoned her twins. The grief and shame she had felt were being replaced by hope, a hope that maybe, just maybe, she could repair the mistakes she had made. Sarah had been in contact with the social services office, and they had agreed to help her rebuild her life. It wasn't easy, but she was willing to try. She didn't want to lose her children forever, but she understood that it would take time to earn their trust again. She had always loved them, but she had failed them when they needed her the most. And now, They were in the care of people who were far more equipped to protect and nurture them than she had been able to. It was a difficult pill to swallow, but Sarah had taken the first step toward recovery. She attended therapy sessions and support groups, trying to work through the emotional wounds that had made her feel so hopeless. Slowly but surely, she began to regain a sense of her own worth. And though she still had a long way to go, she knew that with time and patience, she could become the mother her children deserved. Meanwhile, Timmy was still processing the events of the past few weeks. He had acted as the protector when no one else was around, but it had left him with feelings of confusion and sadness. He wasn't used to seeing the world in such a complex way. He had always thought of things as black and white, good and bad, but this situation had made him realize that things weren't always so simple. Timmy's mother, Karen, continued to offer him support. She knew that her son had always been sensitive and caring, but this experience had pushed him to his limits. Karen worried about how Timmy was handling everything, but she was also proud of how brave he had been. He had been a hero, no matter what anyone else said. Karen noticed that Timmy had been spending more time in his room, drawing or reading quietly to himself. She tried not to worry, but she knew that he was dealing with a lot. She gently knocked on his door one evening, and when he called her in, she sat on the bed beside him. "How are you feeling, Timmy?" she asked softly. Timmy looked up from his book, his eyes tired but thoughtful. "I'm okay, Mom. I just think a lot." "I know," Karen replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "It's been a lot to take in, hasn't it?" Timmy nodded. "Yeah. But I know I did the right thing. I couldn't just leave them there." "You did something that not everyone could do," Karen said with pride. "You showed the kind of courage that most people only dream of having, and I'm proud of you." Timmy smiled slightly, though there was still a sadness in his eyes. "I just wish things had been different. I wish Sarah didn't feel like she had to leave them." Karen's heart ached for him. "I know, Timmy. Sometimes people make mistakes because they don't know what else to do. But we can't change the past. What matters now is that the twins are safe, and that you're safe. We'll get through this together." Timmy thought about his mother's words. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it easier. He still felt like he had seen the world in a way that he couldn't fully understand. He had saved the twins, but it had come with a lot of emotional baggage. And even though he knew he had done the right thing, it didn't take away the weight of it all. The next few weeks brought more challenges, but there was also progress. The twins, though still in foster care, were being cared for by people who had the resources to give them the love and attention they needed. And although Sarah couldn't yet care for them, she was working hard to rebuild her life. It would be a long road ahead, but she was determined to keep trying. Officer Davis had been keeping tabs on Sarah's progress, and though he knew there was still a lot of work to be done, he was hopeful for the future. The community was rallying around Sarah and the twins, offering them support in whatever way they could. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always the possibility for redemption and growth. As for Timmy, he had learned an important lesson through it all, that compassion and bravery could make a difference in the lives of others, even when things seemed hopeless. He had been the hero in a story that he would never forget, but he had also learned that life wasn't always about doing the right thing in the moment. Sometimes, it was about learning to forgive, to heal, and to keep going even when the road ahead seemed uncertain. It had been several weeks since the day Timmy had found the twins and saved them from the cold, and things were slowly starting to get back to normal for him and his family. Timmy had shown great courage, but he was still just a child, and the emotional weight of what had happened was still heavy on his heart. He had gone from being a regular kid, focused on school and his hobbies, to a young hero who had faced more challenges than most adults ever would. But through it all, Timmy had stayed strong, and his family had been there to support him. Karen, his mother, could see how much Timmy had grown since the incident. He was quieter now, more reflective, but still full of kindness. She understood that it had been a lot for him to process, and she had made it a priority to be there for him, listening to his thoughts and concerns. She was proud of how Timmy had handled everything, but she knew that he still had a long road ahead of him. One Saturday afternoon, after spending the morning doing chores, Karen suggested they take a walk to the park. It was a sunny day, and they both could use a break. Timmy hesitated at first, but then agreed. It had been a while since he had been to the park, and he thought it might do him some good to get outside and clear his mind. As they walked down the familiar path in the park, Timmy noticed the bench where he had found the twins. It felt different now, less lonely. There was a sense of calm that had replaced the anxiety and confusion he had felt when he first arrived there. The park was no longer just a place of worry and fear. It was a place where he had made a difference, and that realization gave him a sense of peace. "Mom, do you think the twins are okay now?" Timmy asked, his voice soft. Karen smiled and nodded. "I think they're doing better. They're with people who can take care of them. And they're getting the help they need. And you, well, you helped them in a way that no one else could." Timmy looked down at his shoes, his mind racing with thoughts. "I still think about them a lot. I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been there. What if no one found them?" Karen gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did what was right, Timmy. And because of that, the twins are safe. Sometimes we can't change what happened, but we can make sure that we do what we can when it matters most." Timmy smiled, feeling a little lighter as he looked up at his mother. Her words always had a way of making things seem less overwhelming. He felt a sense of pride in himself for doing the right thing, but he also felt relief knowing that the twins were being taken care of. As they continued their walk, they passed a group of children playing near the playground. Timmy watched them for a moment, then turned to his mother. "Do you think I'll ever get back to just being a regular kid again?" Karen paused for a moment, thinking carefully before answering. "I think you already are, Timmy. You're just growing up a little faster than most kids. But that doesn't mean you can't still enjoy the things you love. You can still be that funny, happy kid who loves playing and having fun." Timmy smiled, feeling comforted by his mother's words. He knew it would take time, but he was beginning to realize that he didn't have to carry the weight of the world on his shoulders. His life was still his to live, and he could still enjoy the little things, even if he had already experienced things that most kids wouldn't understand. As they finished their walk and headed back home, Timmy felt a sense of closure. He had helped save 2 lives, but he also knew that he was still just a child, learning and growing every day. He didn't need to be a hero every moment. He could also be Timmy, the boy who liked to play soccer and tell jokes with his friends. That evening, as Timmy sat at the kitchen table, he began drawing in his sketchbook, a peaceful smile on his face. His drawings were simple, pictures of trees, animals, and smiling faces, but they made him feel at ease. He knew that while life would continue to have its challenges, he had already proven to himself that he could handle whatever came his way. For Timmy and his family, life was about moving forward, healing, and making the most of every moment. The future was still uncertain, but Timmy knew one thing for sure. He was ready to face it, one step at a time. The days grew warmer as spring arrived, bringing with it a sense of renewal. Timmy and his mother, Karen, continued to settle into their new routine, and though life had its usual ups and downs, there was a new sense of hope that surrounded their home. The events of the winter, the twins, the police, and the mystery of the abandoned babies felt like a distant memory now, but they had forever changed Timmy. He had grown in ways that only life's most difficult moments could teach him, but he had learned the valuable lesson that compassion could truly change lives. Timmy continued his schoolwork, but he also found time to go outside and play with his friends. He had a new sense of purpose and a quiet confidence that came from knowing he had done something incredibly brave. The weight of being a hero had begun to lift, and he was learning how to be just a regular kid again, without worrying about the responsibilities that had weighed on him so heavily in the past few months. One afternoon, while playing at the park with his friends, Timmy saw something that made his heart skip a beat. It was Linda, one of the twins, now walking with a woman Timmy didn't recognize. Linda smiled as she spotted Timmy, and he waved back, feeling a rush of warmth and pride. The woman beside her was carrying a small bag, and it was clear that they had been on a walk. "Linda, it's so good to see you," Timmy called out, jogging over to where they stood. Linda's face lit up when she saw Timmy. "Timmy, you're here. I've missed you," she said, rushing over and giving him a big hug. Linda looked up at the woman beside her, who smiled warmly at Timmy. "This is Mrs. Parker," Linda explained. "She's been helping me out and making sure I'm okay. She's my new foster mom. I'm really happy here." Timmy felt a wave of relief wash over him. Linda was safe, and she was in good hands. He knew that the twins were getting the care and love they needed now. Mrs. Parker looked kind and gentle, and Timmy could see that she was truly invested in Linda's well-being. "Don't worry, Timmy. I'm doing much better now," Linda said, her voice filled with newfound hope. "I'm going to school soon, and I'm learning a lot. Mrs. Parker is helping me get everything I need." Timmy nodded, feeling the weight of the past few months lift off his shoulders. Linda was thriving, and that was all that mattered. He had done what he could to protect her and her brother, and now they had a chance at a better future. As Timmy spent more time with Linda, they talked about their lives and shared their dreams. Linda talked about wanting to be a teacher when she grew up, and Timmy, always the curious one, shared his dreams of becoming a scientist. They both had big dreams now, dreams that no longer seemed impossible. The world was full of possibilities for them, and they were no longer burdened by the past. A few weeks later, Timmy's mother received a letter from the Social Services Department. It was an update on the twins and their future. Timmy opened it excitedly, his eyes scanning the page as he read the details. Linda and her brother had been placed in a loving foster home, and there were plans for them to eventually reunite with their biological mother once she had completed the necessary steps to regain custody. It wasn't a perfect situation, but it was a hopeful one. Timmy felt a sense of peace settle over him as he finished reading. He had done something incredible by saving the twins, but it was the support of the community and the help they received that would make the biggest difference in their lives. It wasn't just his actions, but the actions of everyone around them that would help the twins grow up in a safe and loving environment. That evening, Timmy and his mom sat down for dinner, and Karen smiled at her son. "You've grown so much, Timmy. I'm so proud of you." Timmy looked up at her with a shy smile. "Thanks, Mom. I think I'm starting to understand that being a hero doesn't mean you have to do everything on your own. Sometimes we all need help." Karen's heart swelled with pride. "You're right, Timmy. And you've learned that lesson early. But you've also learned how important kindness and courage are. You've made a real difference in the world." Timmy smiled, feeling at peace with everything that had happened. His life, and the lives of the twins, had changed in ways they never expected. But in the end, kindness, love, and the support of a caring community had made all the difference. As Timmy looked out the window at the stars, he knew that this was just the beginning of his journey. He had learned the power of compassion and bravery, and he was ready to face whatever the future had in store. The world was full of challenges, but he now understood that with kindness and courage, anything was possible.